What's the craziest thing you've seen as a truck driver? Story 1. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwanda genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried to communicate that he wasn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the third night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he was not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow, that guy got him out, and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. Oh wow, I can't imagine all of the ways this could have gone wrong. Story 2. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles or so, where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground. I heard what sounded like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then, suddenly it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Can't remember where we were, but my dad used to travel the country with my brother and me during summers growing up. We had a panel van with a bed in the back, so we slept at rest stops pretty often. One night, we stopped at one that was completely deserted. Dad always left the van running for air and music was playing. So a little later, we're all sleeping, but I wake up feeling uneasy. I just was laying there in the dark trying to get my bearings. And there's a song with an intro with quiet voices and a discordant note. It's Pink Floyd's Is There Anybody Out There? It takes 30 seconds for me to get to the first Is Anybody Out There, and about 1:15 to get to the last one, with each building louder. On the last one, my dad's car bolted upright, startling me up as well, and people were out there. 5 men with hooded jackets pulled up were standing around the van. We couldn't see faces, just figured in a semicircle around in front of us. Dad slowly got into the driver's seat and then threw it in reverse and then drove and whipped around those guys and flew out of there. We didn't see any vehicles anywhere else at the stop. It took us a few nights to go back to sleeping in the van. The next ones were all hotels. For over 20 years, I've always wondered at the timing of that song, who those men were and where they came from and what would have happened if we stayed asleep. Wow, that's terrifying. Dad reflexes saved the day again. Story 3. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right and saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad with the same woman in the passenger seat with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks, fuck this, and plans to pull into the next services to report as even if it's nothing or a misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc., and he thinks there's no point in calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, the same Miss Trunchbull hair, the same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over and calls the police. Apparently they have received 3 other calls about the same woman/car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully, it was just a giant coincidence. Who knows? The repeating nature of this one reminds me of one weird story back when I was in high school. It was summer and my dad's birthday, so we drove to a casino 2 hours away to watch a boxing match with my uncle. It finishes and we drive back the same night. We're nearing a canyon with no phone reception, so we call my mom to tell her we'll be home soon. The canyon usually takes about 30 minutes with no traffic. It's around midnight. So we enter the canyon and we're all pretty tired. To keep us talking, we start telling stories, most of them creepy stories. This goes on for a while and it feels like time is passing in a haze. We pass this butte in the canyon and suddenly I get deja vu. I'm convinced we already passed that before. All of us have driven this canyon 100 times and know the layout. We keep talking and then we pass the same butte again. This time I pointed out and my dad and uncle noticed the time. It's 1 a.m. and we're still not home. So we all start to get a little bit freaked out. We stop talking and just watch the road slowly pass by. Now that we're paying attention though, time seems to catch up. We exit the canyon around 1:15 a.m. and call my mom, who is freaked out because she hadn't heard from us. We still to this day have no idea where that extra 45 minutes or so went. Not exactly related, but this story reminds me of a story I heard a year ago from my friend. It was the early 2000s and my friend's father was returning home from his motorbike late at night. So the trip was from one district to another and it was really late at night. So he had to pass through this one highway to get to his home. And while going through that highway, he saw this one procession of people. So it was really late at night and it seemed odd to see that many people all dressed in white at that hour of night on that highway. So he decided to slow down his motorbike and carefully drive through the procession until one man held his motorbike and told him to join them in a very cold and unwelcoming voice. My friend's father politely refused because he felt something was wrong, as there was no village or settlement nearby for this many people to be here at a procession at this hour of night on the highway. So he increased his speed and took off as fast as he could, and as soon as he left the crowd, he saw in the mirror that there was nothing behind. Literally no human being there at all. This is not going to help me sleep tonight. Story 4. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late one night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5 to 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck that they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there were multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a news story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Something similar happened to my dad. He used to leave for work at 5 a.m. and drove for a few hours to work. One day he felt compelled to stop for coffee. He never did this before and never did it since. But that one day he happened to pass an accident that had just happened. He was convinced that the few minutes he took to get coffee were the few minutes that saved his life. This happened to me as a kid in a snowstorm. I had to go to the bathroom and my parents were annoyed because the weather was really bad and they wanted to get through it. But we stopped anyway, get back out on the road, and the cars that had been around us were in a huge, terrible accident. Bodies laying on the road, people sobbing. I can still visualize it like it was yesterday. Sorta similar story. It was a Sunday morning and my family, my wife, 3 kids with one being a newborn, and I, were getting ready for church. My wife and 2 older kids left in one car to get to church early as they were singing that morning. About 20 to 30 minutes later, I leave with our infant. It's about a 30-ish minute drive with about 10 to 12 minutes on the highway. I pull onto the 4-lane highway, get up to my usual speed of about 5 above the speed limit, and set the cruise control on. It's the same thing I do every day on that highway. Work and in-laws are in the same general direction. Light traffic, as it's a Sunday morning about 8ish. A stretch of the highway we take has a 3-mile-long bridge. As I approach the halfway point on the bridge, I hear a voice in my head telling me to speed up. I dismiss the voice, but about 15 seconds later the voice returns and urgently says, "Speed up now." A little freaked out, I comply and go about 10ish above the speed limit, passing 2 cars on my left and 1 on my right as I stay in my lane. About 2 minutes later, as I'm getting off the bridge and approaching my exit, I look in my rearview mirror and see smoke and those 3 cars skidding around. One of those cars was on its roof and sliding down the road. Had I not sped up, I'm convinced my son and I would have been involved in that mishap. This is a good way to remind yourself that your instinct is smarter than you are. Always listen to it. Story 5. Around 2006, I was driving a flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was prepackaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load. In rural Tennessee, memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the MS-ALTN state lines. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind, found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all of the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up onto the load, and start unrolling the tarps again, and I see a guy walking down the same road on the side of the road that I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything of it other than to keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarp set in place and am climbing back down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. An 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long tapered to a blunt point on one hand and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets close to me and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck. Like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said, "Fuck it, good enough to party." The next thing I noticed were his eyes, which I can only describe as off, like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, cause I remember he didn't have laces on his shoe and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah man, you do, we're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear that there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me and continues on his way. Stops about the driver's door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself, "I've got a long walk." At this point I explained that I couldn't give him a ride, insurance and all that, apologized for not being able to help him out, and he seemed to accept this and turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him, and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and I'm climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. As soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his fucking hand, and now I'm nervous, cause he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks like an angry conversation. I cranked the truck up, put it in gear, and just pulled out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face, with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look in the mirror and there's no one there. Dude, obligatory, I'm not a truck driver, but I was driving cross-country back to Nashville from California. Got to Memphis just fine, and I'm on my way to Nashville. Music City Freeway or something like that name. Beautiful drive, long with a few stops lined with trees in the median. A random guy miles from an exit walking along the side of the road. There was a slight hill, so the U-Haul I was ahead disappeared from behind me. After I passed, the guy started crossing the median to the edge of the road. It was weird, so I was looking in the rearview mirror. He is almost across the road, and I see the U-Haul cresting the hill. The guy immediately ran to the center line of the freeway and outstretched his arms right in front of the U-Haul. They swerved, looking like they hit his right arm because he swung around pretty violently. Not one of my best moments, but I noped the fuck out and left that U-Haul to deal with whatever crazy that person had to deliver. I didn't even consider stopping as an option. 25 years later, I still think about it. Sounds like a psychotic break. Could be drugs. Meth will do that. Had a friend in college who got weird on acid once. Just the story he told me, but he came to a median on a busy highway/toll road. Grounded person. But he decided to do too many psychedelics alone in his house in the middle of the night. Just walked out the front door. He said he liked the way the headlights looked, scared the shit out of him after. He's a family man with a successful business now. Sounds like Trevor Phillips. Story 6. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either northeast BC or northwest Alberta. Can't remember the exact location. Driving late at night when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a four-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever. No shine from its eyes, nothing. And then I noticed there were more of them in the ditch on both sides of the road, 5 or 6, or maybe more, all the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things, more like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off. I don't really believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for 8+ hours through the middle of the night, and I was exhausted. Most likely, it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and spending too long staring straight ahead into the dark, but it was still a very unsettling experience. I was driving a C&A pumper from the Hinton area to Red Deer in the wee hours of the morning. Started to get tired, but had to get that pumped back to the yard. Not far south of Drayton Valley, halfway time Alsike. Just as the sun was coming up, I started hallucinating. I saw giant robots holding the mileage signs in the ditch. I distinctly remember seeing the robot from the Beastie Boys intergalactic video holding a sign as I was coming around a bend in the highway. The scary part is, I remember thinking, holy hell, I'm asleep behind the wheel. No, Himes, you're a reasonable, responsible dude. You wouldn't be driving if you were tired. Just enjoy the dream. Holy F, Himes, you were driving back to base and you have not gone to bed. You are driving while asleep and snapping out of it just as the traffic heading into Drayton to start their workday starts to pick up. Well, it's not a ghost story, but I had to share a story of disappointments myself with a fellow former oilfield worker. Moose. They seem to absorb almost all the light, making them black and featureless, and they have no eye shine. They also travel in groups depending on the time of year. I grew up in an area notorious for car crashes due to moose. They also won't move for anything and definitely don't honk at them. They're like hippos, territorial, fast, and absolutely insane. I used to work at an airport with a rental car company. Got drunk on a Saturday night and had to get up at 4 a.m. to go to work Sunday. The girl that was supposed to come in at 2 p.m., allowing me to go home, called off, and my manager asked me to work until close, which was midnight. I did it for the money, and I respected my manager. Due to a late flight coming in with a few reservations left, I didn't leave until 1:30 a.m. I was so tired driving home that I saw people standing on the side of the road waving at me. I realized after several seconds they were just mailboxes. You'll start to notice a lot of strange objects if you drive around long enough. Story 7. I've spent the past 4 years driving every day and night for work. I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. An important note, it's a 2-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife and told her there were high wind advisories and very possibly a tornado threat throughout the Delta, and I'd call her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had eaten dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you've never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. I had driven maybe 30 miles miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being an MS native, I knew in July that hail meant tornado. I pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, no lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me, and start looking for the storm/tornado that I believe is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turned to the driver's side and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed and he was gone. I slammed the truck into drive and took off. We have all the time running cameras on our phone. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did, however, pull the SD card and check the cameras. I promise you, this guy never popped up on my front or rear cameras. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore if I don't absolutely have to. I made the drive from Cleveland, MS to Starkville and back just about every weekend for a year, and I always drove at night. It was unreal how you would just hit a point in the road and just descend into the Delta, flat with hardly any trees, since most of it was farmland, and weirdly darker than the rolling hills that lead into it. The Delta is a strange place, and I could die a happy man if I never returned. There's just so much flat, empty land around those parts, it has to get creepy at one point. Story 8. I'm not a truck driver, but the story is from a truck driver. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at a gas station. At about 6 a.m., a semi pulls into the fuel aisle. The driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white, and he is obviously upset. My first thought was that the poor man had hit someone on the road. We get a lot of drunks walking across a 4-lane highway in front of the store, so I ask what's wrong. He looks at me for a second and is like, "I'm not crazy." Now I'm thinking, great, I'm here all alone and this guy's losing it. I say, of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road. Like a deer or bear? We had a bear get in the dumpster last week. No, bigger than a bear, on its back legs. Maybe a big person? It picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over its shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in a shift. A local comes up to the counter to get his usual, and the guy tells him the story. The local says, "That's the Bigfoot that lives near the county line." The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he has two heads. He's gotta be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at record speed and leaves never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't go into the woods because, I don't know. Well, Bigfoot was my first guess. Decades ago, my friend's dad was driving home at about 2 or 3 a.m. It was a rural area, so no streetlights. He saw what he assumed was a young man walking along the road and was surprised to see someone out that late. As he got closer, he saw the guy was wearing a mohair suit. I did say decades. Closer yet, he realizes this guy's not wearing a suit, he's just that hairy. All this time, he has been going slower and slower, thinking maybe this person needs a ride. So by the time he comes alongside, he is at a crawl. The guy walking bent down to look at my friend's dad, who was driving a full-size van. Needless to say, no ride was given. The dad put the pedal to the metal, got home, and climbed into bed. He was shaking so hard that it woke his wife. He told her the story, including that the face he saw was very unappealing. "Oh, I saw Bigfoot once. I'll repost my story. I saw Bigfoot once while camping with my Boy Scout troop. We were camping at Little Squaw Lake in Oregon, which has a trail that rings around the lake. We were camping at the end, opposite of where we had parked the cars, so as far away from any passerby as possible. There were maybe 2 hours left of sunlight and everyone was starting to gear up for dinner. I thought I would do everyone a favor and go collect some firewood before dinner started. I decided to walk around the lake since it was going to be a pretty sunset, so off I went by myself. Also, I didn't tell anyone I was going. I had picked up a fair amount of sticks and branches that I was carrying with both arms across my chest. I was maybe 3/4 of the way around the lake when I came to a small bend in the path. I could hear ahead of me some leaves rustling and I expected to round the corner to see a deer. Instead, I came across Bigfoot. He was kneeling on the side of the path that was towards the lake. His back was to me. When I saw him, I stopped in my tracks and just stared at him. He lifted his head up and sort of sniffed the air. As he was sniffing, he turned his head back and got a look at me. At this point, he stood up and faced me. me. He was tall, I'd say 6'7" or so, and had auburn-colored hair, which was head to toe, excluding his face and palms of his hands. We stared at each other for what seemed like a few minutes, but I'm sure it was more like a few seconds. I guess he didn't like me standing there with a bunch of sticks in my arms because he knelt down and picked up a big rock, like the size of his head, and held it over his body, arms extended. This is when my adrenaline kicked in. I knew we were going to fight and that it wasn't going to be pretty, so I manned up and did the only thing I could do, and ran away as fast as I could. As I was running back around the bend, I was dropping the branches everywhere, but somehow managed to hold on to one. I turned back towards the lake and held the branch like a baseball bat. I stood there waiting for Bigfoot to come around the corner chasing me with his big-ass rock, and I was going to hit him with the stick I found. I stood there for a minute thinking, I'm gonna hit him. I'm going to hit Bigfoot. I'm going to hit him. I'm an idiot. At that point, I just went back around the lake to the camp. I didn't have any firewood. It was late, and no one had seen me for over an hour. I would have gotten yelled at and asked where the hell I'd been, except that as I was walking into camp, my tent mate tried to light our campfire with white gas from our lantern. The fireball that erupted in his face distracted everyone, and by the time things calmed down, it was time to eat, and everyone forgot that I had been MIA. Story 9. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night going through a slow stretch at about 30 kilometers per hour. Every so often I think I see something out of the window and beside me. Just a glimpse of movement. When I look though, I don't catch it. Finally, on about the third time, I whip my head around this time and I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. Not long ago, I got lost in a national park that I was visiting for the first time. I was hiking and went too far in. Around 9 p.m. it was an abyss. Thankfully, it was a clear sky and a bright full moon, which helped me figure out the landscape. I was using the phone's flashlight and was carrying a DSLR camera with an external flash. The phone died, so I had to use the camera's focus assist beam to light my path, and strobe test the flash, hoping a ranger would see it and come pick me up. Anyways, as I was pointing the camera left and right, lighting my path to make sure I didn't step on a snake, all of a sudden, two glowy eyes. I had never seen a wolf's eyes glowing in the dark before, and seeing this for the first time was just a whole new shit my pants category for me. I froze solid thinking that this was it for me. Now someone somewhere told me that dogs can smell fear, so if you think and act like an alpha, they won't fuck with you. So I thought maybe I should do the same and kept walking. For some reason, the wolf ignored my ass, and I was like, I'm definitely gonna run into the pack, but thankfully didn't. Wolves are really cool, and it's fascinating how they just appear and disappear out of nothing. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.